Today's video is brought to you by Glass Spider Publishing. Offering a wide range of hybrid book publishing services, Glass Spider Publishing is your one-stop shop for professional editing, design, publication, and book marketing services. Visit glassspiderpublishing.com today to learn more. Welcome back, my friends. Today I am using a 12 by 16 inch black canvas, and as always, you can use any size, shape, type, or color canvas you like. You can paint it black with gesso or black paint. I just took a chalk pencil and just kind of made a mark where I want the brightness of my sky to be. I know that I want it very dark behind my trees, so I just put a line on my canvas to remind myself how far down I want to bring the bulk of the brightness. Now I'm using my number 8 Filbert, and I loaded up with kind of a thin mixture of phthalo blue and white. You can use any blue you like. It doesn't have to be phthalo blue. And I did add a bit of medium to it so that it's nice and thin. And I'm just kind of marking out where I want my kind of cloud, spacey sky shapes to be and in what direction. And I kind of wanted everything to feel a little bit swirly. So you'll see me working into that as we go. It's important to keep your paint thin here, especially at the bottom. Remember that hard lines are going to be hard to cover up later, but because this paint is thin, both with medium and because I'm kind of doing a little bit of a scrubby application, anything I don't like is going to be super easy to get rid of later. So I don't have to stress out if something looks weird or it's too light or too much or too far down. Anything like that. Just work nice and thin. For the most part, I'm using the side of the brush, not really the flat part. The side is going to help me get that thin application and just kind of keep everything a little bit soft. Darken it with just a little bit more blue. I realized it's been a minute since I painted a night sky, and so I really enjoyed doing this one, and I really wanted to put more into it, get some stars and stuff going, but ultimately I decided not to because I'm going to have the sky covered up with trees quite a bit. So rather than painting a bunch of stuff that was going to get lost in the mix or just make things too busy, I decided to keep it fairly simple. But I think we'll probably do a night sky painting sometime soon. Do the shapes in this sky however you like. You don't have to do, a swirly type shape. And I've kind of got a mixture here between the swoopy swirl and then some cloud type shapes at the bottom. But feel free to mix it up and do it however you like. But regardless of how you shape your sky, I think the technique is really going to be the same. Keep using thin paint at this point and slowly build it up. Getting a much lighter version of that mixture. A little bit of medium to thin it down, but not too much. And I'm just going to lay in where the moon is going to be. Don't aim for perfection. There's no such thing anyway. We're going to go over it a couple of times. And I don't want those hard edges here just yet. I know I'm putting hard edges in, but I'm going to smooth them out here in just a second. The softer the edge of that moon is, the more it's going to seem like it's glowing rather than just a big static circle on the sky. Now this paint is just a little less thinned down than the first layer. It's still got a bit of medium in it, but I'm applying it a little bit more deliberately so the paint is going on a little bit thicker too. I'm just kind of focusing on building my cloud shapes now. If you're using my Filberts like the one that I'm using here, just make sure you're using the edge of the brush. That's going to help you get that wispy, thin cloud shape. And that same exact color and mixture, just building on our swoops. Now, like I said, you don't have to worry about getting too much color or color in places you don't want it, because we're going to glaze down quite a bit of it in a little bit, which helps the sky feel more dynamic, I think. When you glaze, you know, add a very thin, transparent layer of color over top, some things get lost, some things get amplified, but you never fully paint anything out when you're glazing. So you get a lot of dimension, and I think it just looks a little bit, to me, it looks like there's a bit more depth to it when you glaze rather than mix all of your colors. So just focus on getting texture and color in the sky right now and worry about making it look good later. I know my sky looks kind of a mess right now, kind of looks like a kid did it, and I'm okay with that because I know what's coming next, and I know that it's going to be better once I do that next part, but it has to go through this kind of messy, scumbly look to get there. So just trust the process. Just a tiny bit lighter of that same mixture and building on those cloud shapes again. Just picking up a little point of medium. I have plenty of paint on my brush, but the medium kind of re-wets some of that paint and makes it apply a little bit smoother, and it also thins it down makes it a bit more transparent, which I think you know by now. I'm a big fan of transparent color. I remember when I very first started painting, being frustrated by the fact that some colors were transparent and some colors were opaque. And I remember thinking, why do we even want transparent paint? Shouldn't they all be opaque? But now I'm almost the other direction. There's times where there's colors that I have that are opaque and I think, God, I really wish this color were more transparent, but it's just learning about the properties of the materials that you use and then figuring out how to make those properties work for you rather than fighting against them. Another reason I like to glaze so much is if you look at this, you know, it's blue mixed with white. It's kind of got this pastel-y Easter egg blue to it. And the more of the blue I put in and the less of the white, the more transparent it gets. You can still see the white under it. It can be hard to create the dimension that you want by mixing because colors get chalky when you're mixing with white especially. So when we glaze, that's when we can get the vibrant color back in. So I did dry my canvas. It's completely dry at this point. I'm going to my 5/8 inch angle. Just picked up some phthalo blue, and as you can see, I'm mixing in a lot of medium with it. Now I'm going to start glazing some color, which is going to amplify that blue. Give me some nice bright blues. But you want to make sure that it's thin. I'd rather have you put too much medium in it to begin with and end up with not enough color than to not put enough medium in it and just paint over everything. So don't be afraid, get a lot of medium in there. See how much more vibrant that color is now. And then two things when working with the medium in this way that I really need you to remember. The first is I hear a lot about matte medium being sticky. If your matte medium is sticky while you're doing this, it means that you're working it too much. The medium is trying to dry and you're still trying to push it around. That's why it's sticky. If it gets sticky, just stop. Just leave it alone. Even if it looks bad, it can be fixed, but you have to let it dry first. The second thing I want you to remember about working with matte medium in this way is if you're applying your paint and you start lifting up paint that you already applied, and now you're getting these weird little patchy holes in your color. I know it's tempting to keep going over it to try and get it to stick. It is not going to stick. Once it starts lifting and creating those holes, the only thing you can do is stop and let it dry and then come back to it. So here I just mixed a little bit of Payne's Gray in with the phthalo blue, and I'm really working on bringing in some shadows, especially down here at the bottom. And then around the moon too. I have way too much color there, but it's gonna be perfect once I glaze it down. So just keeping Payne's Gray in that blue mixture. You don't want to use Mars Black here. Mars Black does not glaze well. It will kind of obliterate. It's more brown, and so it doesn't look real good with blue. Where the Payne's Gray is very blue, and it glazes with blue really nicely. super light touch to soften all of those edges. All right, we're gonna let that dry for a little bit. That glaze, it was getting a bit thick, and I did notice a little bit of pulling. So I'm using my number 6 Filbert, getting my blue color again. Mr. Moon is all about saying hi today. Nice light blue, and let's just amp up some of the highlights in our cloud shapes. Very small movements there, just kind of plop down a little blob of paint and then back to the edge of the brush to lightly break that shape up and push it around. If you're depositing way too much paint, even though your pressure is nice and soft, your brush is probably just a little too wet. So just kind of wipe it on a paper towel real quick. All right, starting to fill in that moon shape again. It's still kind of a blue color. It's not pure white. Keep those edges nice and soft. Nice and transparent, add a little more medium to that. Just spend as much time as you need here and try and enjoy the process. Try and find that little meditative space within it where you're just kind of observing what's happening. Don't try to force the paint to do something. Don't judge it and, you know, think, well, it doesn't look like this or it doesn't look like this or whatever. Just enjoy the process. Watch how the paint moves. Watch how the shapes and the colors form. I think that when you can find that space, which it can be challenging, especially if you're not used to what it takes for you to get into that space. But once you find that space, I think you learn so much more when you paint without judgment. That doesn't mean that, you know, everything's going to turn out great or that you're going to love everything you do, but when you paint without judgment and you see what happens, I think you learn more. So, like I said, it's not about not making mistakes or loving everything you do. And painting without judgment doesn't mean not recognizing when something is good or bad. So what I mean is you're painting along and something doesn't turn out the way you want it to. Well, painting from judgment means you stop and you're like, that looks horrible, I gotta fix that, this looks so bad, how can I fix that, I don't know how to fix that, and you kind of focus in on that spot. But painting without judgment means, oh, I recognize that this part isn't looking the way that I want it to, but that's okay. I'm going to move on to something else, and I'll deal with that when I come back later. You know, don't let yourself get upset by it, or don't let it derail your progress. All right, my canvas is dry again. I'm back to my 5/8 inch angle, some phthalo blue and a lot of medium, and let's glaze again. I'm being a little bit more selective, not necessarily taking this dark glaze over top of my lightest areas. I'm just kind of pushing back a few areas that I don't want to be quite as bright. So a lot of it is going around the edges of my cloud shapes. Really working on the depth in there around the moon. Darkening some of that quite a bit and letting other bits kind of emerge out of it. just a super light version of that blue over top of my brightest areas. So I just mixed more medium into it. And let's pull some panes in and really deepen some of those shadow areas. The reason I went to my 5/8 inch angle for the glazing is because it's got a wide brush head, so it'll cover quite a bit of area, but it's also very soft, and that very soft texture is nice for laying down thin paint and for softening very, very easily. If I use a stiff bristle brush, I'm going to get more of a scratchy look, and I'll have to put too much pressure on it to break lines up, which will continue to deposit more paint. So that's why I went to this softer brush. It doesn't matter necessarily that it's an angle brush. You just want something a little on the larger side that's nice and soft. Even darker here. I'm only putting in a little bit of medium, so this is almost pure paint. These areas that I really want to make shadowy, I'm putting this heavy mixture on. But since Payne's and Phthalo Blue are both transparent, it's going to take a lot of paint to really cover anything up. Like covered up to the point where it was never there. And I just pick up little bits of paint, or medium, to help me blend. Starting to get a couple little holes in here like I was talking about. So it's about time to stop and let my sky dry. I really could have painted this sky all day. I think we will do a big night sky painting very soon. Really dig into those techniques more. All right, this sky is completely dry now. I'm using my number 6 round, and I just got some white and just a little bit of medium to kind of smooth it out. Not really enough to make it transparent. We're going to start getting the white of the moon in there. Picked up a little medium to keep the edges nice and soft. The softer your edges are, the more the moon is going to seem like it's glowing. right, now it's time to put some trees on. And I decided to turn my canvas upside down because painting trees upside down, I think you get a little bit of a different look than you do painting them upside right. But that's up to you. If you don't want to turn your canvas upside down, you don't have to. I'm using my number 6 still, and I did get Mars Black. So this right here is Mars Black. The reason I'm using Mars Black instead of Payne's Gray for the trees is because Mars Black is opaque, so it's going to easily cover this sky. Where if I use Payne's Gray, which is very transparent, I'm going to have to do several layers on the trees to make sure that the sky isn't glowing through the paint. Holding my brush nice and far back, very loosely, kind of twisting it just a little bit as I go to get me some kind of wonky, jaggedy, old, gnarly trees. And I'm not using any medium, just a little bit of extra water so that the paint flows nicely. Painting upside down is a really good way to force yourself to see things as shapes and colors rather than, whatever it is that you're trying to paint. Going down to my number 2 round brush. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be exactly the number 2, just a smaller round brush. I'm using the exact same technique. I'm just making some smaller branches off of the larger trunks. All right, my brush was really wet there, so I had to stop, grab a clean, damp brush, and you can just easily wipe it away. So keep a clean, damp brush nearby when you're doing little detail work like this, just in case you get something that's wrong. Wipe it away immediately and you won't have to worry about it. Don't go crazy trying to get all of your little detail branches in here. All I'm doing is just some off of the main tree. We're going to move down to the long liner to really get some scrubby little branches in there in just a minute. But also remember that when a tree is old and dry and dead, that the first thing to go are the little tiny branches. They break off. And so a long dead, old, dried up tree like this is probably not going to have a ton of little teeny detail branches. That tree on the left side of the screen I took off the top of the canvas. I would recommend that you have at least one of your trees go off of the edge. That way it doesn't all just feel kind of cramped into the scene. And now I'm just going to kind of scratch in a few indistinct, kind of thin branch shapes. This paint is pretty thin. I think I even mixed a little medium into it, so it's a bit transparent. Just get something, like I said, kind of thin and indistinct scratched in there. Just picking up Payne's Gray now. My brush still has some Mars Black on it, but I just picked up Payne's Gray. A little water so that the paint flows nicely. And I'm going to thin it down. I want this pretty transparent. I'm just going to keep adding a few transparent, indistinct trees to just make it feel like there's a lot of trees in the distance there, that it's not just these couple larger trees that we're putting our energy into that are there. All right, onto my long liner, picking up some Mars Black, adding a good amount of water to it because it's hard to get paint to flow on this little brush without it. And now I'm going to scratch in some little detail-y branches. I'm being very loose with this, almost scribbling with the tip of the brush. Don't try to, make sure that every branch starts from somewhere specific and ends somewhere specific. I think that makes them look too tight. Just get in there and kind of scumble some little scribbly branches in. If your line breaks here and there, I think that that's okay because it can kind of indicate a bit of a highlight where the branch just blends in with the sky. And besides, if you're outside, especially at night, and you look up at an old tree, you're not going to see every single detail. You're not going to see exactly where each branch starts and stops and exactly how it moves and what it's connected to. Just kind of scribble some texture and some shapes in there. You can give it some very specific branches, but for the most part, just get kind of loose and almost sketchy. See, right there, just kind of scribbling. Some of those lines double back on themselves, and that's okay. I personally think that the more branches and tree trunks you add, the better it looks. When you just have a couple trees with a couple of branches, I think it looks a little bare. So don't be afraid to get in there and just really get a ton of little branches and little tree trunks going. All right, done there. Back to my angle brush, picking up some medium and some Mars Black. And I'm just kind of painting in over the trunks at the bottom. Because I added some medium, it is a little transparent. I'll still be able to see quite a bit of those trunks, but I want to create a bit of a soft gradient. And definitely very lightly dusting that over the edge of the sky. Just bridging the transition there into the sky with some of that Payne's Gray and medium. All right. We are now ready to start working on our ground. So I'm using my chalk pencil again, and I'm just going to sketch out generally where I want the path. I know that I want just like a little old paved path through this cemetery. But a lot of it isn't going to show. There's really just going to be a suggestion of it, so you don't have to get too crazy specific. You don't have to worry about perspective too terribly much. And back to my number 8, Filbert. Just picking up some phthalo and some yellow ochre. We get kind of a nice, kind of a earthy green with that. Throw a little bit of Payne's in there to dampen the brightness down a little bit more and make it a little on the darker side. Just a bit of medium to kind of smooth out the paint. Edge of my brush, and I'm just gonna lightly scrub in some grass. Overlap your path just a little bit, as well as the black at the base of the trees. Dust it up over top of that. Don't keep anything too terribly separate. And move your brush in all different directions. This is a very overgrown cemetery, and these grasses and bushes and weeds and whatever, they would not all be growing just straight up. You'd get a little bit of variation. So move your brush in all kinds of different directions. Back to my 5/8 inch angle, mixing up some Payne's Gray with a little bit of white, a little bit of yellow to try and nudge it toward more of a stone color. Little medium just to smooth out the paint, not really for transparency. And what the heck, throw a little bit of Mars Black in there too. And I'm just gonna kind of start dusting in some texture really for my path. I want it to look like an old, degrading stone path. So I don't want to just go in there and paint it solid. Overlapping my grasses a little bit. Let's throw a little bit more Mars in there. A little bit more yellow. The Mars and the yellow ochre are gonna give me more of a brownish gray, where the Paynes and the yellow ochre can almost make a hint of a green. I'm gonna be using the tip of the brush. I'm kind of pressing into the tip of that angle brush to create some little stone shapes. That color was not quite right. There we go. Just some little dashes. When you push into the tip of that angle brush, you get a very abstract shape, a shape that's not really going to be the same from one dot to the next. So that's why I'm pressing into the tip of that brush. Let's lighten it up, get a nice light color here. I want to make it look like there's some stone tops in this path. So then again, right there, pressing into the top, the tip of that angle brush. Don't go crazy in here and just fill it with, you know, specific stone shapes. I'm adding some and then kind of moving on and just putting this color in a few places. If you get too shapy with the color all throughout the path, it's gonna give the path too much detail. It's gonna draw too much attention. You just don't want to do that. Back to my chalk pencil, everything is dry, and I'm just gonna start sketching in some gravestones. And I looked at a bunch of pictures, and the gravestones in my local cemetery where we take Freya for a walk, but I'm not really using any references. I'm just kind of making some shapes that I think will look interesting. And I really like these little pedestals. You see them sometimes in cemeteries, but not a ton, like these 3 and 4 layer pedestals, but I thought that they would be fun to paint and look a little less static than just an oval sticking out of the ground. So I decided to do a few of these little pedestals. And it's okay if they're wonky, it's okay if they're crooked, it's okay if your tombstone leans, or if the perspective isn't quite right, because things change over time. Things get weathered, they start to lean in the ground, bits of them flake off or crack off altogether. Sometimes those layers on the pedestals, they're not really attached, it's not one solid piece. And so over time they can shift. So don't be upset if things are a little bit weird, because that's what happens in old cemeteries. Things change and they can get a little weird. And this chalk pencil is so easy to paint over and clean up later. If you have a hard time sketching on your canvas with something that's easy to remove, I highly recommend you pick up one of these pencils. There is a link in the video description. It's an affiliate link to where you can get the very pencil that I'm using. And I highly, highly recommend them. I went through a lot of different types of pencils before I found this one and decided that this was the one that I liked. I think watercolor pencils, they really impact the color of your paint, or they can, and sometimes they're hard to clean off when they still show afterwards. And lead pencils are really hard to clean off, and they show because they're kind of shiny. But this chalk pencil has been really, really nice to work with. All right, let's start filling them in. I'm using my number 6 round, and I'm just mixing up a gray color, just using panes and Mars and white and a tiny bit of yellow. It doesn't matter how dark or how light it is at this point. It doesn't matter if it leans more one color or another. Just make up a gray color. This is just our base color for the stones. So it doesn't need to be perfect, and it doesn't need to be the same from stone to stone or side to side. Don't worry about light source. Just get a gray color on your stones. You'll see that I kind of paint the face of each one and then go back and do the sides with a darker color, and that wasn't really to set like a light source, like to say this side's going to be lighter and this side's going to be darker. It was just so I didn't lose any of the details that I had put into the stones. That's the only reason I went and painted different colors of the gray on different sides of the stones. Just looking for some clean edges there. Now this piece at the bottom of the pedestal, the very bottom edge, I'm going to leave soft because obviously we're going to have grasses that come up over top of it. I don't want to contend with a hard line down at the base in the grass. I know it might seem just a little early in the season for a cemetery painting, but this painting was voted on by my YouTube membership. We had a poll and I asked, what kind of paintings do you want to see? And this was the winner. So who am I to deny my YouTube members? We're doing a cemetery painting long before Halloween, but I mean, that's how I roll anyway, so I feel like it's not too far off brand for me to do a cemetery. And I'm just making some small ones in the distance. It's just basically one brush stroke. Some of them lean one way, some the other way, some are straight up and down. Just really kind of have fun with it and just get some in the distance. Keep that color either a little darker or a little transparent. Don't make these in the distance too bright. And now we're going to make the other sides of the stones. I even added a little bit of my blue into it there. I thought about putting like a little crypt off to the right-hand side, but I wanted to keep this painting a little bit on the simpler side, trying to offer a little bit of a variety of paintings for different experience levels. So I thought I'd keep this one a little bit simpler. So we just went with a few tombstones, but you are more than welcome to do a mausoleum or a little crypt type building it would really be the exact same technique we're using here. You would just do a larger shape that's a little bit more house shaped, but other than that, it would really be the exact same thing. That color on the top there is a little bit lighter. So I figured while I had that on my brush, I would just add it to the top of some of these since I already had it mixed up. Because clearly the top of the tombstones would be taking more light than really any other part of it. I'm now using my number 8 Filbert, my small soft Filbert, and we're gonna work on getting some texture and highlights onto the faces of our tombstones. So I pulled some blue in there because the blue will give us a really nice highlight color for the stone. So just the blue, the panes, and some white, and of course medium. So this color is quite blue, but I really like the way that it looked on here. I'm adding it very loosely, so we're definitely getting crisp edges there, but everything on the inside is very loose. I'm allowing some of that base color to show through and just kind of scumbling it on. I'm going to change my color up a little bit. And I'm just kind of scrubbing it into there again very loosely so you can see the brushwork, you can tell the difference between the two colors. It's not a smooth, perfect blend. Same here on the pedestal, allowing a bit of that first color to show through. A little darker at the bottom there and just kind of scumbling it up into that lighter color. And I know that my light source doesn't technically agree all over the place, but really, I'm not worried about it. I think that it's okay to, not get real scientific with your light source. It's okay to make decisions that show off parts of your painting that you want to see, where if you did the light source exactly the way it was supposed to be, you would lose those details, you would lose those things. In movies and in TV, they intentionally manipulate what is lit and what isn't, really without regard to the light source. Sometimes if you pay attention when you're watching a movie or when you're watching TV, sometimes the way the scene is lit or the way a person's face is lit, it doesn't agree with the light source because it wouldn't look good. And I think it's perfectly okay to do the same thing in painting. People ask me a lot, well, how do I know where my light source is? And, does this agree with the light source? I think you just make a decision. I mean, if you're trying for a hyper-realistic painting, then of course your light source matters big time. This is not a hyper-realistic painting. This is a pretty simple painting, and I think it's perfectly acceptable for you as the artist to make a decision on what you want to see in your painting and then make it so that you can see it. And if you ever need to, or you have to tell yourself this, you can justify it by saying, well, maybe there's another light source that I can't see. In the cemetery, maybe there's a parking lot just off to the right here, and there's a light on in the parking lot, and that's why I can see the faces of these tombstones even though the moon is behind it. I just don't think that it matters all that much, and I don't think that we need to put that much energy into stressing over it in a pretty simple painting like this. So I am primarily keeping the darker colors on the sides of each of the tombstones because I want to be able to see the faces where I'm going to put what looks like carvings and text. I'm not actually going to write anything on here. I think that draws too much attention and takes away from everything else. If there's actual text on the stones, the only thing you're going to look at is the words on them. So I'm going to make it look like there's text on it, but it's not actually going to be text. I'm now back to my number 2 round brush, and I'm just mixing up gray, just Mars black and titanium white, just for a color that's a little bit lighter than what's already on the stones. And now I'm going to make it look like there's maybe some carving details. So I'm adding a little bit of a highlight here around the outer edge. It's a pretty broken line. And I don't take it all the way around the edge. I think it's enough to suggest that it's there. A little bit on the edge, on the top edges of the pedestal here. Here, I love this. I'm just kind of dashing a little shape. Almost looks like maybe there's a carving, some kind of a symbol or something on the tombstone. It's just kind of an abstract shape, keeping this paint kind of transparent. And then I'm kind of pretending like I'm writing in like fancy cursive, very small, but it's really just little dots and dashes and blops of this color. And another little symbol at the bottom. Now I'm going to show you a super easy way to make that look almost 3D. So for now, just use a light color and get it on there. I know it looks kind of flat and, you know, not real, it doesn't look real good, but we're going to make that text and the little symbols kind of pop and seem like there's actually some 3D texture there. And on this one, I decided to put the text on kind of this top facing edge. getting the brightest highlight on the top edge of those little pedestal levels. All right, nice dark color. I've got some Pains and some Mars. There's a little bit of white in there, so it's not pitch black. I want it dark, but I don't want it, you know, pure black, like I said. So now we're gonna hit the low light areas, so the bottom of the levels of the platform, and kind of blend that up a little bit. And we're gonna run a bead of this darker color wherever we have the lighter color. So here, I'm gonna take that dark color, I'm gonna darken it up just a little bit, and I'm kind of dabbing it here and there underneath parts of the lighter color. And that makes it look like that carving has little bits of shadow in it. That's one of the ways we're gonna make it start to look 3D. So under the text here too, little bits of that darker color toward the base of those kind of text type shapes. Don't go overboard with it. You only need a tiny, tiny bit. And then around where we put the lighter color on the edge, we're going to run a little shadow next to it as well. I'm going to just take a bit of this dark color and just add some some very faint shadows to some of these distant tombstones. Otherwise, they just look like weird solid gray Tic Tacs or something. I'll put a little bit of a highlight on them as well. But we're not going to spend a ton of time on these little ones. They're very distant, so we want it to be obvious what they are, but we don't want them to have too much detail. So just little bits of that highlight, and then I kind of swipe it out with my finger just to make sure that it's nice and soft. Just brighten up the tops of these, because again, that's where they would be the brightest. A little medium helps kind of spread that paint out. Now I'm going to add some final highlights to our little carvings. So I'm kind of dipping into a little bit of a brighter white and just adding a few little punches of this brighter color. It's almost pure white that I dipped into. I need to put some text on that little square one. Just kind of started the text with mostly white, since this is very light anyway. And then the shadowy color can be lighter than on the other stones. All right, back to my number 8 filbert. I brought over a little drip of water. I'm going to pick up a tiny bit of pure white and mix it in with that water. You can skip this if you want, obviously, but I like to do just little bits of flicks just for some extra texture on the stone. I'm holding the brush very close to the canvas. I'm probably a ½ inch, maybe a little bit farther, but not very far, and I'm flicking very slowly. So I promise I am not getting paint all over the place. So if you do it very slowly like this and very close to the canvas, you're not going to get paint all over the place. Cleaned off my brush, I'm going to do the exact same thing, but with Payne's Gray, just for some contrasting little texture flicks. Going to my fan brush, we're going to start working on the grasses. This is my favorite part of this painting. I picked up some panes and some phthalo blue, just mixing up this nice dark, dark blue color, and then a bit of yellow to nudge it toward green. My yellow is super dry. I'm going to have to get some new yellow in a second. It's all dried out. And then I'm kind of stabbing the tip of the brush into that pile so that it breaks up the bristles. And I'm just kind of dabbing. Don't use the brush flat for the most part, because you get kind of a weird eyelash shape. If you notice, I'm using the corner of the brush. I'm kind of crushing into the corner of the brush, holding it up and down, and that's giving me this wild, overgrown grass look. And definitely overlap the base of your tombstones. And overlap your path. Be careful, because this brush can hold a lot of water. It's because it's got the natural bristles. So wet it in your jar, but then maybe definitely wipe off the drips that are on it. Otherwise, you're going to have paint running all over the place. And I got some fresh yellow. Let's make it even brighter. Stabbing straight down to break up those bristles. I did get some weird eyelashes there, but I'm going to break it up so it's not a big deal. More yellow. There was a little bit of a thin down white there too, so I just pulled that in, but it doesn't really matter. I dipped into a little bit more yellow, and then I'm just very lightly touching the tip of those bristles to give me like some little flowers or seed heads, dried leaves, however it is you want to interpret what that color is. Dunk straight into the yellow and then just stab it in that little pile of paint to mix it in a bit. Tiny bits in the distance, but don't let the blobs be quite as big. Back to my number 8 Filbert, getting some panes and a little bit of blue. We need to glaze in some shadows in the grasses because there's not a lot of shadow in there right now, and to make them look nice and deep and overgrown, we need some shadow. So I thinned it down with a good amount of medium, and then I'm just going to lightly dust in some of that color. Wherever I've got some of the yellow, I'm kind of adding this color underneath it so that yellow feels like it's the top of the plant, and then this dark feels like it's at the bottom toward the interior. Back to my fan brush. I'm going to pick up that dark blue mixture and some yellow. And we're going to amplify the bright color in the grasses. Still just using the corner of the fan brush. Get some of those flowers over top of the path. And I feel like this ground needs a little bit of different texture aside from the flowers here. So I'm going back to my long liner. I'm getting that dark blue mixture, the panes and the blue. A little bit of medium and always water. You need a little extra water with the long liner. And I'm just going to loosely scumble some little branchy shapes in here, kind of scribbling with it. Just like with the little tree branches. It's okay if they double back on themselves. It's okay if you can't tell where something's coming from or going to. Just kind of break up some of this grass with a few little twiggy shapes. And even some lighter ones, adding a little white into that too so that it really stands out against what we've already got going on in there. And I'm going to do the same thing, just kind of scribble some little stick shapes in, but then I'm also kind of dotting with the tip of the long liner. It's just all about variation, getting some variation in there. And I'm going to really go crazy here in a minute and scribble some long sticky bits in. I have another painting that I'm working on that uses a lot of these same techniques for kind of a flower garden. So if you like this technique here for the grass and you'd like some more information on how you can use that, stay tuned because I have another painting coming up soon where I'll be using these same exact techniques. clean number 8, little drop of water, gonna do a bit more splattering. Got my yellow, I'm gonna add some white to it to really lighten it up, make it a nice bright, pale yellow. And I'm just gonna do just a little bit of flicking in the grasses with some of this lighter color. I'm not gonna go crazy with it, just a little bit. All right, back to my number 2, my dark color, the blue, the Payne's gray, and a little bit of Mars black. Just mixing up a nice, kind of a rocky color. I need to finish up the sides and kind of the top edges of the stones. And then we're done with the stones, I feel like. So right there, I kind of picked up a little bit of white, laid it down on the palette in kind of that cross way. And what that does is very loosely mixes the paint on the brush so that I don't get just a hard white line. I get a little bit of a mix. Just kind of helps add to that painterly effect. Just a little more highlight onto some of the carvings. Just doing some final punching of those highlights with some almost pure white, just here and there. Keep them special. Don't make every highlight bright, bright white, because then nothing will be special. I just didn't like the side of this stone. It just felt kind of flat, so we're just gonna knock in a bit of personality to it real quick. Darken the base of it. And then we're gonna move on. Now, like I said, I had thought about putting a little bit of a crypt over there on the right in that big dark area. And then I didn't know what to do. So I decided we are going to highlight some of those trees and bring them forth. So I'm using my number 6. I loaded up with Mars Black. I'm just going to reshape the base of this tree, give it a bit more of a shape, a little something more to do than just stand there in the distance. Painting out some of those distant tombstones, and that's all right. And then I want to very subtly highlight it. So I'm dipping into the white. See how I dropped it down there, kind of like one direction and then the other? That makes it so I've got some of the white on my brush and it's mixed a bit with the black on my brush, but it's not mixed perfectly. So I get a bit more of a streaky effect as I'm applying the paint to the tree. I'm pretty much going to do that same technique all throughout highlighting these trees. Pick up a little paint, kind of swipe it down, and let it loosely mix, just like that. Very delicate touch. I don't want this tree to scream and have, you know, overly bright highlights, so it's going to be very subtle. Kind of twist your brush a little and dash at it so that your tree trunk has some texture to the bark. It's not overly smooth. Thinning that color down so it's a little more transparent. I'm just going to give a suggestion of that highlight on the other large trees. I want that one on the right to have the main amount of highlights. The rest of them are just going to have a suggestion of it. See, just in a couple of places. I'm not even highlighting the entire tree, just a couple of key areas. Black, medium, and just glazing down. That one got too much, so I'm just kind of dashing some of that almost pure black over top of it, just to knock that gray down just a little bit more. Super transparent dark gray color. And I'm going to sketch in some trees into the distance. You can barely see these. On the camera, I don't even know if you can see it. They didn't really show up on the camera too much, but in person, it's there just enough to tell you that there's a lot going on in that darkness, that it's not just a big wall of black. But the effect is very, very subtle. Back to my number 2, loading up with Mars Black, little point of white, kind of blending it in with that little cross action there. Some faint highlighted teeny branches. Just mostly in the super dark areas. And just a couple extra points of brightness in the tree trunk. All right, I think the trees look pretty good. Let's give one last little bit of shadow into our grasses at the base here. So this is my clean number 8. I only picked up Payne's Gray and some medium. It's about a 50-50 mixture of Payne's Gray and medium. And I'm just really knocking in some dark shadows into the bases of some of these plant shapes. It's a good way to help separate some of the stones from the background, some of the stones from other stones, from plants, whatever. So don't be afraid to take some of this color over the edges of your stones too. In fact, I'm also going to use it to glaze in some shadows into the pathway. I really hope that you guys enjoyed painting this with me. Like I said, I know it's a little out of season, but I figure, you know, it's never too early to get ready for Halloween. Not at my house anyway. So I hope that you learned something and that you enjoyed it. As always, feel free to let me know if there's any of the techniques that you've seen in this painting that you'd like me to expand on in future videos. In my YouTube membership group, we do a poll every month for upcoming videos. Whatever gets voted on and wins that poll is what I'm going to work on for a new video. That's where this one came from, like I said before. So if you are interested in taking advantage of that, being a part of that, then I would love if you would join my YouTube membership. You can just click join under this video. I'll also include a link to it in the video description. I know sometimes that join button doesn't show for everybody. And while we're at it, if you need a new set of paintbrushes, I would love it if you would check out my paintbrushes. There's also a link in the video description below. Little glaze over the path just to keep it nice and shadowed. I don't want it to be too obvious and take too much attention. There you have it. Thanks so much for watching and for painting with me today, everyone, and I hope to see you all again next time.